Hi, everybody. It's Pete Hannity for the SVRA with legendary NASCAR champion Cale Yarborough and vintage race car driver David Nidell. Now, we've got a couple of cars behind us that were either driven or owned by Cale and have some great stories behind them. And we're going to tell you about those today as they get ready to run them in the race weekend in Virginia and beyond. So, gentlemen, let's first head over to this one. So this is that number 11 Oldsmobile you had so much success in, and maybe one of the most memorable moments in all of stock car racing in 1979, February of 79, the Daytona 500. Now, that year was the first year that CBS showed the entire race live. And there was a snowstorm, a major blizzard, all across pretty much from Chicago on over to the Northeast. So folks didn't have a whole lot to do, so they were glued to their TVs. Late in the race, you're on the backstretch, you're on the inside. Donnie Allison's on the outside, one of your great competitors over the years. I think we can all picture it today, you guys going door to door. Eventually, he goes up into the turn 3 wall and comes down. You guys end up in turn 3. And kind of take us what happened from there, because there's a little extracurricular activity.
Well, I had Donnie set up to on the last lap where I wanted him. I knew I could slingshot around him and win the race. And as we came down the backstretch, I'd already made up 3 laps during the race. And coming down the backstretch, he just I pulled down on him to go by him, and he just crowded me off the racetrack and ran me off the racetrack. And it rained all night. The grass was slick, the mud everywhere. So my car came back on the racetrack and got into his and put us both out of the race. Let Richard Petty, who was 3/4 of a lap down, win the race. And it was pretty tough. It made me mad enough to fight. And that's what I did.
And speaking of that, and by the way, Petty would hold off Darrell Waltrip by about half a car length to win the race on the other side of the track. So you get out of the car. Now, as I've heard Bobby Allison tell it, Donnie's brother, he simply came around to give Donnie a ride. But what happened from there?
Well, I don't know what he stopped for, but he didn't have any business there, and so he and I got into it too. And I always said that that was probably the most unfair fight that it ever was, because it wasn't but 2 of them, and so it wasn't even a fair fight.
You're saying they needed more Allison brothers, huh?
Absolutely.
So that race itself really, let's face it, probably got NASCAR more into the national sports conversation. I've heard you say it before, that folks glued to their TVs watching the race live in its entirety for the first time really kind of realized you guys were real people. There was more to you than just folks inside of a car.
I think so. I think it's the best thing ever happened to NASCAR. It made not only nationwide, it made worldwide news. And it's I'm sorry I didn't win that Daytona 500, but I'm happy that I helped make NASCAR what it is today.
That you did. So that number 11 car, 1979. But let's go back a year. 1978, you became the first driver to win 3 consecutive Cup titles, matched only since by Jimmy Johnson. And you won 10 races that year. Mm-hmm. And, of course, this is the car, the very Oldsmobile, that you sat in and you drove during that 10-win, 3rd consecutive championship season.
That's a fact. I won a lot of races with this car. This was a good race car.
This is the kind of machine I look at it. You just see, and it just brings back such great memories, such nostalgic memories going down memory lane. I mean, it just has that classic look that we associate with the guys from your era.
Well, no doubt about it. We call this racing stock car racing. This car looks like a stock car.
This Oldsmobile, was it something about the Olds, because you had such great success in it, that you liked in terms of the other makes you may have driven over the years?
Well, we tested a lot of cars during the off season, and we liked what we saw in the Oldsmobile and decided to make a race car out of it. Okay, but I won a lot of races in this car, and I'm just so happy to see it back on the racetrack and see it become a race car again.
And let's face it, you look at the body style. I mean, there are some great things going on in NASCAR today, but what a wonderful looking machine, and it brings you back to the memories of that number 43 STP as well, and all those other great competitors from your era. It's kind of like going down memory lane when you see this car. Yes,
it is. You can tell this is an Oldsmobile. If they had an Oldsmobile out there on the track today, the way they got them all built just like, you couldn't tell it was an Oldsmobile. Mm-hmm. So I'm just glad to see something like this happening, that we can put the old cars back and people can enjoy watching them race again.
When you see this car, I mean, you sat in this car, you drove this car to many wins, many championships. Does it just kind of take you back to that time when you were behind the wheel competing on Sundays and bumping and grinding?
It does. I wish I was 30 years younger and could do it again.
I'll bet you could hold your own in this machine against today's machine.
I'd give it a try.
So, David, as a vintage race car driver, you're always looking for that next great legendary car. You happened to discover this in a museum collection. You thought, why not? You gave Kel a call. Take it from there.
Well, we picked up this car out of a collection from Tennessee, and when I got the car, I realized, I love historic race cars, and I love historic race cars with provenance. So anything that's been driven by a professional, especially a guy like Cale, who I used to see on magazine cover. I mean, heck, you were on Sports Illustrated 3 or 4 times when I was a kid. I had to have it, and we wanted to put it back on the racetrack, and so I actually picked up the phone. I was a little nervous. I picked up the phone, I called Cale at his dealership, and when I told his secretary that I had one of his race cars, he took my call right away, and we started talking. And I think, Cale, I think you were a little bit stunned when I said, yeah, I'm going to take the car out of the museum, and I'm going to put it back on the track, because Cale said, oh, wow, okay. Well, do you have interest in other cars? And I said, well, if they're associated with you, if you've got a neat car with some good history, absolutely. And so he invited me down, and I flew down to his dealership, and we came out to his farm, and he sold me the Andretti winner from '97, the Pepsi winner, and fantastic. So it's kind of a really neat experience for me as someone who just loves to drive old classic cars, you know.
I think the question that beckons, first off, when he told you he'd bought your number 11 car and he was going to put it out on the racetrack, your first question had to be, okay, when do you want me in it?
That's what I should have done, but I didn't. He's done a good job with it. In fact, he won the championship with this car, and I'm just so happy to see him run again. You know, sitting up in a barn doesn't do them any good. They need to be out where people can see them.
It must have been something to take that call and think, wow. Just as you say, you know, that's because in many respects, what a great tribute that is to your career and all that you accomplished in this car.
Yeah, it made me feel good that somebody wanted to take some of my cars and make vintage race cars out of them, and he's done a tremendous job at it.
Now, David, you mentioned the car that Cale owned that won the Pepsi 400 in 1997 with John Andretti behind the wheel, and you were also able to purchase that. Let's tell a story or two about that one. So after you bought the 11 out of the museum collection, you came down to visit Cale, and lo and behold, you discovered another jewel in his collection, didn't you?
Well, like I said, I love historic cars, and especially when they're driven by a legend or owned by a legend. And yeah, Cale had said to me on the phone, "Do you like other cars? Would you be interested? Because I've got a couple down in my barn." So. Yeah, I was down here like the next week, wasn't I? It was pretty quick. It was like, yeah, I'm here. I thought he was going to change his mind, maybe.
Or have another buyer and, go with a bid. You had to feel like you woke up on Christmas morning because there was someone who was, bringing your competitive part of your career in the case of the number 11, and in the case of, you were just as competitive as an owner. I remember you came to the track with your drivers wanting to win, but he was bringing various aspects of your competitive career back to life.
That's right, and as I said before, we keep these things, and sometimes we shouldn't keep them. And this one was sitting in a barn collecting dust, and would probably sit there forever. So I'm just glad David came along and wanted to do something with it, put it back on the racetrack where it's supposed to be.
John Andretti took this to Victory Lane at Daytona in 1997. You, I'm certain, were familiar with that fact, but think about it. Yarborough, Andretti, Daytona, and you were able to add this to your collection.
Well, Nidell doesn't really fit in the mix that well when we start talking about that. But I'm hoping to do the car some credit, and we're going to drive it, and we're going to have a lot of fun with it. And I don't think we'll average 172 plus mile an hour, but yeah, we'll have some fun, and hopefully we'll be successful like we were in that one.
Danville, Virginia, that event's the first time this car gets rolled out on the track.
Yeah, it's the debut. We've been working on this. Scott, my mechanic's been working on it for ever since it came in, so we wanted to get it just right.
Now, Cale, talk about life as an owner after that illustrious racing career. What was it like transitioning from being the guy behind the wheel to the guy who ran the whole show?
It was tough, I'll tell you that. It's it's tough being a team owner. During my racing career, I tried to get involved in other businesses, and I was in automobile business and the Hardee's business and several other businesses, and trying to run a race team. And to be able to run a race team and keep it competitive, you've got to sponsor hunt 24 hours a day to be able to make enough money to survive. And so I did it for a while, and I weighed things out, and I said, well, the other things I'm doing after racing are more important, I think, than owning a race team. So I was lucky enough to be successful, and but I finally gave it up.
That great driving career, though, and David, I know you and I remember watching Cale compete against not only Petty and a young Waltrip, but David Pearson and an up-and-coming Benny Parsons and Buddy Baker and so forth. I'm not surprised, though, that he was able to make that transition because he had a decade and a half as an owner, and he did have some success and, again, had a race won at Daytona. Memories of this guy as a driver, and as you had said earlier, I mean, you remember seeing him on Sports Illustrated. This guy was one of those brand names. He was right there with the elites of his sport.
Absolutely. I actually remember even the picture with you in the yellow suit with the red stripe on the cover of Sports Illustrated after the race and all sweaty, and yeah, I remember that. So yeah, it brings back, to have these cars back, it brings back a lot of memories, and I'm just glad we could do it.
Now, Kel, I understand your favorite car to drive was actually in your last season competing in 1988, that number 29 Hardee's car.
Well, you know, Hardee's was my sponsor for a long time, and when I was driving the Hardee's car that belonged to somebody else, it was number 28. So when I started my own team, you couldn't get that number. I had to go to 29. And yes, it was one of my favorite cars. And my last race was in Atlanta that year, and we took the car back to the shop and got it race ready again. And it's sitting in the barn right here, right now.
And then you appreciate the fact, the last part of that story, because when you met Cale, that topic came up.
Yeah, it did. We were talking about a lot of things, and we spent a couple hours over here, and Cale said, yeah, but my favorite car was a Hardee's car. And let me ask you something. If it's race ready now, we would just take it with us this weekend, and you can come along and sit in it, and we'll have a good go at it, huh?
We might do that one day.
let them do a test drive, huh? Why not a test drive?
Yeah, well, we'll have to bleed the brakes still. Maybe put some new tires on it, huh?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Great stories about these wonderful machines and your great career. So many wins, so many trips to victory lane, so many memories just for the race fans. And thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you.
On behalf of the great NASCAR champion, Cale Yarborough, and David Nidell, vintage racer in his own right, Pete Hannity, saying so long for the SVRA.